a Navy contract vessel that was in the South Pacific in '63. Jacques Vallée had the story, but he didn't have the source. It was a third-hand story for him, where we were testing the, I think they were the Atlas intercontinental ballistic missiles. We were firing them downstream in the South Atlantic, and this captain who contacted me was on a ship that was retrieving them after a test fire. Now these were not hot. They didn't have nuclear weapons on them. They were trying to get the missile to be accurate. But the missiles kept missing their mark, and they knew there was some kind of a subtle electromagnetic thing happening. And there was always an ET craft around. And they got these on radar. So one night, his radar guy, they had a new, I think it was RCA radar system, and it was sweeping around, and they picked up a craft. And so the captain was called, came up, they got it. He called the command center, and they got it on radar. Unfortunately, they then hit it with some kind of electronic weapon or something. And the thing blew up. There was an explosion in the sky, and it fell straight down into the water, this UFO. And the next morning, his ship was vectored into the point of impact. And they couldn't find the ship, but there was about a 6-foot square pod that had ejected, that had 4 of the ET beings in it. And this guy was a salt-of-the-earth Navy guy, and he said, well, they were handsome little men, but their skin was the color of a Sicilian. I never forget him saying that, Sicilian. Okay. And bronze-colored, no hair, no pinna, which is the pinna is the flap, the monkey ears we have. They just have openings, fine lips, a sort of small nose. And just like the man that contacted me from Skunk Works at Lockheed about the astral projection experience, this person contacted me to find out something that had bugged him. It stuck in his mind and bothered him for 40 years. And I said, well, what is it? He says, well, we got him out of this thing, this pod. They were ordered to put him in the ship's freezer till a nuclear submarine came along and took them, and they were all threatened with death if they talked about this. He says these little men were in sort of these metallicized fabric. It was almost metal, soft metal-like fabric, one-piece suits. I said, yeah, like a onesie. But it didn't have any buttons or zippers. And he said, how could they have gotten in them? And I said, this is why you're calling me? And it was. This was exactly why he was calling me. And I said, well, I don't know if you're going to like my answer. And he said, well, tell me. I know those damn things, you could have to cut them off, but we couldn't even cut them. I said, well, the way that the suit is made, they just stand into an energy field that has a resonant, and it materializes around them. Like 3D printing, but like a 3D, zip. So there are no, and it comes off the same way. It dematerializes off and materializes on. But I said, did you notice anything about this thing that they were in, that was floating? He said, yeah, it had no pieces. I said the same thing. So I call this sort of a infra-ultrasonic manufacturing, where if you imagine going beyond the speed of light, speed of electrons, beyond the 0-point energy field, and creating sort of a architectural blueprint of a spacecraft that's in that dimension, like an astral, like your astral body, and have that resonate, and it comes into this dimension in toto. So it recruits the atoms, the molecules, the structures, not by digging them up and smelting them and banging them and doing rivets like we do on an airplane, but and that's, I call this extraterrestrial manufacturing 101 that I'm sharing with you. So that's why these spacecraft, the guys who I know who've gone to ones that have retrieved them, they're seamless. Now if you see one that has rivets and seams and parts of it, that's Lockheed and Northrop's and Boeing's anti-gravity stuff. But these, the ET ones, are completely seamless, and the light coming from them is so amazing, it's so pure, you never quite forget it. Because the light is coming from a source and materials that aren't manufacturable. You couldn't even manufacture something that pure in space. And there was a part of a craft that they got in Brazil, and I forget, it had magnesium and some other stuff in it, but the elements that were in it were so pure that even in the vacuum of space we could not manufacture it. And no one understood how they could be doing this. I said, because they're not going to some asteroid or planet and digging up stuff out of the earth and smelting it and melting it and then putting it together. They're creating a field, and it resonates and then comes in from that transdimensional, virtual, near astral, I call it, the near astral. And it then pops as a totality into 3D. Make sense? Which, if you study the literature of the craft that have been retrieved and even the clothing on these beings, they're consistently this same report. Now, why is that important? Because it means that when you're out under the stars and you see something, and if it seems just, it's too beautiful to be real, it looks like a jewel. We were once in Colorado and there was an object, it looked like it was a crystalline jewel in the sky. And it was there for a number of minutes, and you couldn't even, it was painful, it was so beautiful. And then there was a fighter jet was vectored in, and the thing popped and began to go off, looked exactly like a 737. Everyone saw it. So, you know, but what's fascinating is the purity of the light and the quality of it. And then there's one more thing. These craft are imbued at the level of nanobiotechnology. You know what that is, nanobio? Where they're actually living and they're conscious. So the craft itself has the consciousness of the occupants, and often it's the chief pilot or the person who's actually directing it, which is usually, they will either touch it and think and they'll go. All right? But the craft itself is not just like a piece of machinery. It's actually living. And there have been more than one military guy I've interviewed who have been on retrieval missions when they get there and the craft has been injured. I call it injured because it's organic. And there'll be a crack and it'll be trying to heal. Like if you did a cut and did a time lapse of a healing of a wound on skin, it's doing this kind of thing, trying to fix itself. And so the craft themselves are nanobiotechnology at the level where they then can subsume or take on the awareness of the occupants. And that's how they operate. So many times people have an experience with a UFO, but they'll feel that the UFO itself was communicating or was conscious. I say, well, it is. That it was like this living, organic, conscious thing. And many times people will dismiss it, and I'll go, no, thousands of people have had the same experience. And it's because it is. It is a living, conscious nanobiotechnology at the level that it can then take on the awareness of the occupant or the occupants. But usually it's the main occupant who's the anthropocentrically projecting here captain or the person in charge. Does that make sense to people? So the really important thing to know, because if you're out into the stars, I remember last year, just before I had to take this trip to Australia, and I was laying on the beach, and I was with a friend, and it was beautiful. You could see the whole Milky Way galaxy on the outer. I was on the Outer Banks, and I was out there, and we were talking about this stuff. And there's someone who had never seen one of these objects, and suddenly in the Milky Way, an object about that big at arm's length, which is huge. It was pretty close and pretty big, materialized, and it was this beautiful kind of crimson ruby red, but it was like it was living. It was like this thing that was living, and it moved and went the whole distance of the Milky Way galaxy. It wasn't an instantaneous thing. It was there for a little while. I don't know if anyone else on Earth saw it, but we saw it. We were looking straight up. And it was like it was alive. The sky was alive. The object was alive. And I realized it was going right in the direction of Australia, which a few days later, I was wheels up to Australia. So, and I think it was, I told my wife, I said, I think they were telling me, you know, bon voyage, and we'll be with you there. So it was a beautiful, beautiful experience. And it can happen that easily and that quickly. When I started on this, the core project was this, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, making contact. I got dragged kicking and screaming into the Disclosure Project, which started as Project Starlight, where I was doing briefings for the president and CI director and folks like that, because I was told by some folks that you know, you can do this, but there's all this stuff that has to get fixed, because there were tragedies of history in the post-World War II era that should have never happened. And we also have to fix that. So there are 3 legs of the program that I'm running. One is the CE5 initiative, CSETI, Interstellar Contact. The other is Disclosure Project, and the other is bringing out the technologies to basically transform the planet physically. All right, so that evolved, but the one unfolded the other. The reason the intelligence community got interested in what we were doing is that they realized we had figured out the Rosetta Stone of contact. And the friendlies then came to me and said, would you please try to fix this? And then someone asked me to come up and brief the CIA director, and then this person, and then the president was scared to death, and you know, they hit a scalar weapon that knocked down Marine One, that was President Clinton's helicopter. It lifts up in the White House, and the shot was fired across the bow. So I've been doing stuff at that level, PI, presidential intelligence, since 1993. But you know, frankly, that is not where my real passion is. My real passion is what I'm talking about today. And it's in a way sad that we're having this generation, those of us between the ages of puberty and senility, I think everyone here, most of us, are really having to correct a problem from 50 to 100 years ago. Because remember this, high voltage, free energy, they didn't know what it was, technological systems that just generate energy, late 1800s, early 1900s, Tesla, Faraday, Maxwell. EMGs, electromagnetogravitics, where you can create a high voltage at a certain resonant harmonic where you get lift, 1920s, T. Townsend Brown. So we could have had world peace, free energy, anti-gravity, no roads, no pollution, no poverty, and a just and peaceful civilization around the time of my grandparents and great-grandparents. All right? But it is still, even though this is my passion, it's also an act of tremendous compassion to fix that problem. Because it doesn't, if everyone's running around enlightened and remote viewing, but we're cannibalizing the planet and destroying it, that's pretty stupid too. So this is all part and parcel of an endeavor. I just want you to understand that. And we're at a point where we got to make it happen. Because you know, the Earth, the Gaia, is a conscious living entity. Literally, it's female. She's female. It's living, and it has its consciousness. Not human. Don't anthropomorphically project. But it's a conscious living being. And this was really made clear to me in 1990 when I had a contact experience and went out into deep space and actually was introduced to each planet in our solar system. It was really cool. And I realized the Earth, and there was this enormous unconditional love from the Earth that was radiating to me as I was out there. This craft was in our front yard at our house in Biltmore Forest, next to the Vanderbilt Castle in Asheville, North Carolina. And I went, and then I saw Mars. Mars is male. Venus is female. Mercury, I think, is gay. It must be and kind of androgynous. It sort of kind of swings both ways. And Who cares? Saturn. So I actually was introduced to each planet. And then I heard that within the planet, each planet, there was not only the consciousness, but a sound. And it sounds corny. It's like the music of the spheres, which is real. And I could actually hear this pure tone coming from each planet that was there. It was all these different tones. I'm not very musical. You don't want to hear me sing. That's tragic. And so as I heard each one, then I became aware that every star was conscious and was a being and awake. And then each of them had a tone. And I went into a state of consciousness where every single standing wave tone from everything in the creation blended into one pure note, one tonality. It was a beautiful, beautiful. So what I tell people about this is that the cosmos is inside your consciousness. Everything, every level, every structure. And so, let yourself be there. And when you do, then you become this sort of a child of the cosmos who's free to journey. And it's beautiful. We have our bodies, we have our individualities, but we so limit ourselves by not understanding what's really inside us. So the ETs want us to understand that, because we then become children of the cosmos, and not just children of the earth. And this is what I said to the head of Army Intelligence. I said, I belong to the cosmos, a family of cosmic beings. So you don't have any jurisdiction over me. And that's what I told him. Go away. And that gives you such enormous sense of freedom. Never be intimidated. All right? Don't be. Let yourself be free. Be like a child experimenting with these technologies. Because, if you're pure-hearted and, one of the things, I get choked up talking about this. We're at a time where we cannot limit ourselves anymore. And the future that has been forestalled for 100 years is trying to burst through. But guess what? It isn't going to happen by the ETs landing on the White House lawn. It's going to happen internally through us. And that's what the universe is waiting for. And so creating the world of our dreams, a world where we have free energy, no poverty, true justice, a peaceful civilization that becomes interstellar within a very short amount of time. That's the task at hand. And it's something we can accomplish if we just realize that there's this power within each of us to manifest and create it. But we first have to have the vision of it. If you don't have the vision, where are you going? This is why I'm trying to share this beautiful vision. And that's really what started all this, was contact. And, the whole Disclosure Project and the Orion Project was the project trying to deal with the technologies, was something that was being done because we have to also do that out of compassion for the Earth. Because the Earth is a living, conscious being. And we're killing her. And, there was this enormous unconditional love from the Earth. But there was this sadness. And the Earth was saying, this isn't going to continue for much longer. Because it cannot. You cannot have 7.2 billion people living with coal-fired systems. India, China now have some of the worst air pollution in the world because they're industrializing like we were in the 1800s. How do you fix this problem? Well, not from the consciousness that created it, but the consciousness of our technological systems is a reflection of our inner state. Division instead of unity. Over unity systems are integrative. and they're life-supporting. They don't hurt the Earth. Burning coal and oil, and never mind fission, nuclear power plants, which is basically a steam engine where you're heating water by splitting the atom and causing all the Fukushima-type waste. These are destructive things that cause cancer and air pollution and death and destruction. But that's a reflection of our inner state collectively. So collectively, we need to have a consciousness shift into this higher state of consciousness that is the foundation for these technologies coming out. Why is that so key? Why am I talking about this? Because if we don't have this movement in awareness and consciousness that is holistic and peaceful and is the foundation of universal peace, the technologies will be used for destructive purposes. You can weaponize anything. Now, I'll tell you something. A few years ago, the colonel in charge of future technologies for the Air Force, was a euphemism for technologies they already have. You have to understand the double speak and double think of the intelligence community. Pulled me aside and he says, you know, these technologies that you're trying to bring out and that you're exposing can actually be turned into weapon systems. I said, yes, of course. I can take a knife or scalpel and save someone's life by doing something correctly, or I can slit someone's throat or put it through their left ventricle and kill them. We have to do this from a higher state of awareness and purpose. And I told him, I said, yes, you're right, but guess what? I know that it's already been weaponized. The worst people in the world already have these technologies and they've been weaponized. Okay, the worst people. So let's at least bring out the ones that are the entry level, stage 1, level 1 technology, so we create the world of our dreams with no pollution and free energy and abundance and the end of poverty. And this is not a utopian vision. This could have happened 100 years ago, certainly 50 years ago. And it's time for us to say, no more delays. We're going to make this happen, but it has to come from inside out. And you cannot divorce the higher states of consciousness and the vision of how we need to live on this planet from the technologies. Because if you do, they just end up creating another weapon system. And I think this is where the movement in awareness and consciousness has to come together with the science and these technologies. But the real love that all of us should have for the earth and for the, you know, there are 20,000 generations in this great waiting room, the matrix of consciousness. It's 500,000 years of beings ready to come to this planet. You can feel them. And we're sort of the bridge generation between an old era that's closing and another era that's opening. And the old era was 450,000 years. This new one's around 500,000. And so we're at that point in a million-year overall time period where we have to get this right. And it has to be the bringing together of the vision, the consciousness, and the use of these technologies for peaceful purposes all together. And I think this is what is the biggest task of this generation, of those of us who live on this planet. You know, there's nothing bigger. Now, the civilizations who are coming here are waiting to see if we can get it right. But they're not. This is not something that can be imposed externally. I always tell people, avoid cosmic codependency. It's like a bumper sticker. Great bumper sticker. Avoid. What does that mean? Don't think that, you know, the ETs are going to come here. Everyone wants to either demonize them or deify them. No. They're here waiting for us to get this right so that we can join the interstellar family. And until we get it right, there's a sort of a quarantine. We're not allowed to go out there too far because we're considered not civilized. As Michikaku said, you know, we're not even a level 1 civilization yet, which is peaceful, you know, having energy and technologies that don't damage the biosphere and are living together as a peaceful civilization. We're not at a level 1. And the civilizations that are here are level 12, 15, 30. I mean, if you can go interstellar and you haven't blown yourself up yet, you figured out a few things, all right? So, you know, put the xenophobia aside. Think about this realistically. That's how we're going to have to make this happen, though, is understanding that our consciousness is the key. And the science of consciousness, the development of this, is not only the key to remote viewing and making contact, but creating a civilization where we look at that far horizon and we see, my God, what a world this could be. Right? Beautiful. And that's all waiting to happen. It's all waiting. But it isn't going to happen externally. No, they're here to help and to assist, and they're watching. But it's really got to be done. It's like us going to Afghanistan and trying to impose Jeffersonian democracy. Stupid. So, sorry. I mean, I don't mean to offend anyone, but hello. There has to be the citizens of the planet Earth, us children of Earth, have to have this come from within us. And we have to do it heart to heart, mind to mind. And so that's why I want you to feel the power of not only the consciousness within you, but the power of this vision. And I remember just before the National Press Club event in 2001, very stressful period. I mean, death threats galore, all kinds of machinations. And we went up to Joshua Tree National Park, and there's a cave. We call it the Shaman's Cave, and we went in there to meditate, and it's where you can see the petroglyphs in it. It looks like a UFO, actually. It's this domed thing. Nobody knows how to find it. We know how to find it. It's fun. And we went in there, and we were meditating, and there was this very clear message that came. You're the vision that must guide the world. And it was all based in this consciousness developing and spreading amongst humanity that allows for not only the disclosure and the veil to be pulled back on all these secrets, but these sciences and technologies to be brought out, but in non-harmful ways, in beneficial ways. And that is what really is the core. And we're going to take a break in a minute, but as we take this break, I want you to think about the power of that vision and thousands of people not only experiencing this state of consciousness, but then manifesting it. So once you learn to go into deep consciousness and remote view, you can also use that same technique to see that vision and see the world that's ready to be born. And I say we're sort of cosmic midwives. There's this new world ready to emerge, and we need some skilled people to help in its transition. And that's our role. These beings are very eager to find humans who are enlightened enough to approach them peacefully, because what our covert classified military projects have been doing is to try to track these objects and shoot them down. I mean, their whole game is cat and mouse, where they're trying to destroy them. So,
is that what Star Wars was really about? I mean,
yes.
the satellites and all during the Reagan administration?
Yes, and of course, and I have been, if people go to disclosureproject.org, they'll see that we have testimony from over 100 top-secret military and intelligence witnesses who've dealt with this issue, and a number of them describe our attempts to down and to attack these objects. It's a very dangerous and foolish thing that we're doing, and it's threatening the equilibrium of the world, quite frankly, because...
So when do you think they're coming?
Why?
Yeah.
Well, I think they've been here around for many thousands of years. I seriously doubt it's a recent phenomenon. I think that if you look at this, and in talking to people in British intelligence and the people in the United States military, the real increase in these events happened around the time we started detonating nuclear weapons.
Yeah, I get that.
And at the same time we started going out into space. I mean, I think you have to understand that any civilization that has reached a point of peaceful coexistence, who would see us evolving out of the time of World War II into this post-World War II period where we began to go into space, but at the same time began to develop hydrogen bombs and nuclear weapons, I think this would put a big red flag over this planet. And my understanding is that they're quite concerned about what we're doing to this planet, and that also that we not be turned loose on the universe, where we could be a threat to other planets that are existing peacefully and do not even have the concept of warfare and weapon systems. And so
because it's not just about this planet, right? I mean, it's about what happens on this planet affects the totality of reality.
Of course, in every thought and conscious action, but when there are mega system events that happen on a planet like this, it certainly affects other worlds, and it affects the equilibrium of the cosmos in general. So there's a serious reason for their being here. I think number one, they're observing what we're doing and watching us make this big transition from a fractured
sort of warring world to a peaceful civilization, and we are going to make that transition. It may not all be smooth, but we'll make it. And I think, meanwhile, they're wanting to be sure that we don't become a threat elsewhere. And I think they're also wanting to start to open up contact with people who are peaceful and enlightened enough to understand how to make contact and why they should be making contact.
Sure.
One of the things I point out to people is that a lot of folks will say, well, you know, what if some of them are hostile? I said, well, the only ones that are hostile are the ones that are being manufactured by humans. And the big mythology in the New Age world is that there are the good ones and the bad ones, and in reality, most of that is disinformation created by the intelligence community to scare people, because eventually they would like to have us put all these weapons in space and spend trillions of dollars on Star Wars type stuff. And this is exactly what we've already done it. I mean,
yeah, but I mean,
I have folks who worked on these in the 1960s, where we already had weapon systems that were based in space that were targeting these extraterrestrial vehicles. So this has been going on for 40 years.
There's not just one race that's visiting us, though, right? I mean, do you get that?
Oh, there are dozens.
Yeah.
And none of them are hostile, and none of them are harmful. And some of them are quite worried about our hostility and have done things to try to contain us. And I think that containment, like a quarantine type of exercise, has enraged some in our classified military projects, and they don't understand why these beings would not want us, for example, to be traveling with our experimental anti-gravity vehicles, which we have, all the way out to Mars or all the way out to some of the other planets. And the reason they don't want us out there is because we're not going out there with the right intention. So the core to making contact with these beings, and the key to humans as a species being welcome in space, is establishing universal peace. World peace won't cut it.
Yeah.
It's not going to be enough just that we have peace on Earth. We also have to have universal peace, which is what we're telling people, is that it has to evolve into an understanding that peace has to occur not just on Earth, but our whole attitude towards the cosmos has to become peaceful, or we're not going to be allowed to fulfill our potential to become ourselves interstellar beings.
Boy, Stephen, we have a lot in common. This is awesome. Well, you know what I find fascinating is that there are so many instances where the military has fired on the ships. I mean, even going down to Mexico and interfering with things that were going on down there, our government. And I don't know of any instance where any of the ships have fired back or done anything destructive.
No, it has never happened. And, you know, if you go to a UFO conference, quote unquote, you'll find that at 90 to 95% of everything being shared there is some type of concocted disinformation designed to scare the bejeebies out of people.
Yeah.
Because, you know, just like 9/11, the way that you control the masses is through fear, which is the opposite of love and the opposite of peace. And I think that this psychological warfare technique has been used for, since the beginning of time, for demagogues to control the masses. And yet, when our team has gone out all over the world, I mean, you have to understand, we have had an advanced diplomatic team that has gone all over the world to areas where these ET beings are being seen. We've made contact. We've had nothing but the most beautiful and peaceful encounters. You know, all these stories of mutilation and abductions and torture and sexual rape and all this negative, horrible stuff, that's all disinformation or counterintelligence activities. Now, there are people in the classified programs that are human that stage those events for their psychological warfare purposes. I have a document from 1953 where the CIA stated that one of the key values of the UFO issue would be in their psychological warfare value. And it's a very interesting document. And I have another document. People need to get this book called Disclosure that have all these government documents that we have acquired and the testimony of all these military and intelligence witnesses, because they describe clearly what is really going on behind the scenes and why the media is deceived and why the public is deceived on this issue. And one of the deceptions is to try to present this idea that there's some kind of hostile threat from outer space, because they're trying to lay the foundation for future war in space. And this is what we have to resist. We have to resist this siren song of greed coming from the military-industrial complex and the sort of orthodox eschatologists, the people who would like to figure out how to precipitate an end of the world scenario, like these books Left Behind and all this sort of fundamentalism, those are the guys running this program.
Yeah.
These classified programs are filled with really kooky people from the lunatic fringe of the religious extremists. And so people have to understand that this is the opposite of where our civilization is really headed, and these are the dying gasps of a dying world order.
There was something that I read in your book that kind of stunned me, and although it didn't surprise me, it was just, and that is that there are certain abduction programs that are being funded by people on the earth.
Oh, yeah. Well, these are, if it's an abduction, it's human. If it's contact, it's ET. I tell people this is all linguistic, perhaps, but there are lots of people who've had ET contact, and there are lots of people who've been victims of these abductions, which are run by humans. For example, I have personally interviewed several military men, one of whom was an Army Ranger, who worked on special projects that were compartmented, where they were using what are called alien reproduction vehicles. And these are things that look like a flying saucer or UFO that's made by Lockheed and Northrop. And they had either costumes on or used what are called PLFs, program life forms, that look like extraterrestrial beings, but they're not. They're completely man-made, to abduct or frighten people so that there would begin to be this subculture awareness of fear, and so that they can eventually ramp that up in sort of a cosmic Gulf of Tonkin scenario to stampede military and political leaders and the masses into accepting the cost of building weapons in space and getting into an interplanetary war. It's a matter of public record that General Douglas MacArthur, in his last speech to Congress, stated that, quote, World War III will be interplanetary war. So this has been in the planning stages since at least the 60s and perhaps the 50s. And so much of the imaging and so much of the subculture awareness on this is being driven by a virulent, well-funded, and high-tech human technological disinformation campaign that's designed to scare people. And what I tell people is that you've got to be able to look through this, it's like the movie The Matrix, this sort of matrix of deception and nonsense, and see what's really true. Because people, unfortunately, because of our sort of primitive brains, have this flight or fight response and tend to believe a threat because we're trained in our tribal roots to be paranoid of the unknown.
Right.
It's the roots of racism. It's the roots of hatred. And I think that this is something we have to resist, because there are people who are deliberately throwing fuel on that fire in a very deceptive way. And what I've tried to explain in this new book is that I have gone into meetings with folks who are in charge of those deceptive programs and have actually acquired documents from institutes that are planning this, quote, I'm using the term used in this top secret document, stagecraft, to simulate these sort of frightening experiences. So I tell people, don't be afraid of the extraterrestrial visitors, but you should be very concerned about these other agendas, and we have to be the counterbalance to that. See, we're the children of Earth, and we alone can transform this planet and prepare it for a time of universal peace.
But people that are contactees do go onto the ships, and sometimes I know do get certain markings on their bodies or other things. And when I read that, where I went was into confusion about, okay, what's what? That's kind of where it took me. You know, okay, if you're a contactee, you pretty well know you are for the most part. But then you get in, then, you know, you start finding that you have marks on your body or different things, which I've talked about on the show before. It's a subject that I'm very interested in. And I was just a little confused about the difference there and what you were talking about.
Well, I think there are people who have had actual contact with ETs that then have one of these paramilitary groups engage them in a pseudo contact event that's an abduction, and so that's deliberately confusing. Okay. And so I think that you have to take every case on its own merits. I know when they have tried to target people in my group with that kind of experience, because we have this information, we have documents and insider whistleblower testimony about the technologies they're using to do this. We're able to discern between the false contact disinformation events, abductions, and the real contact events. But this is where knowledge really is power. Without the knowledge that there's the real thing versus this Memorex pseudo thing, you're not going to be able to distinguish it. And unfortunately, I think many people can't imagine that the human capabilities have evolved to where they have. And I point out to people that many of the capabilities that I'm describing existed by the 1950s.
Oh yeah, we're unlimited in scope of consciousness and what we're able to do with it.
No, I'm talking about classified projects that have have weapon systems and things that look like UFOs that aren't. And
but then there's so many people that have abduction type descriptions and yet no real memories. They think it was a dream, or they wake up with marks and they don't know where they're coming from. And that's why I got confused about what you were talking about. I just wanted to clarify it for me as much as everybody else.
Well, you have to take each case on its merits, and you're not going to know is it real or is it Memorex without doing a very careful investigation. The problem is that if you go to people who deal with this issue, they don't know that there's a parallel human deception program that's extremely high-tech, and they're going to confuse the real contact with the false stuff. Mm-hmm. Why? Because they don't know the false is even possible. And I remember talking to someone who did research on this once, and when I started talking about the EG&G, which is a big high-tech electronics company that was making the implants, the involvement of E-Systems and Raytheon, the fact that Northrop and SAIC and Lockheed were building things that look absolutely like an ET craft, but they're man-made, the whole concept of stagecraft. They didn't know this whole body of evidence. And I'm going, well, you better learn about it because you're not going to be able to discern. It's like a doctor not knowing the difference between chest pain from a heart attack and chest pain from a pneumonia that's eaten into the lining of the lungs or something. So, you've got to have a differential diagnosis, and knowledge is the greatest purifier, it says in the Bhagavad Gita, and that's very, very true. Unfortunately, most of what is out there that passes for information on this subject, which is consumed in books and videos and TV shows and what have you, is deliberate false information or disinformation designed for a certain psychological conditioning response, primarily to condition people to be afraid. And what I've said to people is, well, let's put all that aside and let's actually go out to these places and make contact with a group of people who understand the technology of contact. And we go out not only with these consciousness technologies we're using, but also with laser systems and electromagnetic sounds that we send up and all these things. And we, and see what happens and just see if there's anything to be afraid of. And there's not. I mean, the only time we've ever had anything remotely frightening is when we've been, chased by police or had, military helicopter or aircraft come down and put searchlights on us and things like this. But nothing from the ETs has been at all worrisome. It's all been humans. So I tell people that a lot of, in a sense, this is sort of a cosmic Rorschach test. It's a sort of a cosmic mirror. The way people view this is a reflection of their own inner state of knowledge and consciousness.
And all of you know what happened at Roswell, except you don't. You don't go from interstellar distances and just lose your way in broad daylight over the desert of New Mexico and run out of gas and crash. All right, so let's pretend we have a brain. What actually happened, and this is in a document on our website from the FBI, from Guy Hotel, a field agent to the J. Edgar Hoover, is that a special and new radar installation, euphemism, radar, electromagnetic, but it was configured to have this scalar longitudinal energy in it, which basically, what that is, light is a wave like this, okay, and if you have a laser, it's all one wavelength that is synchronized coherently, which is like green or blue or red. That's what a laser is. And this crystal is used to create that coherence. But then, what if you have light that is a point that doesn't have a wave aspect, but it's just a line? Well, now you're going in multiples of the speed of light. And it is. It is not limited to the speed of 186,000 miles per second. But that technology can and has been weaponized. Okay, so now we get to what was really at Roswell that they were experimenting with that caused two ET vehicles to run into each other. One crashed north of Roswell and just exploded in smithereens because it hit the other one when they switched the system on, because it was a fully materialized 3D object, which they are very careful not to do anymore. We'll get to this. The other one continued on a western trajectory and impacted near Socorro, and that's where the little EB, the little extraterrestrial biological entity, was retrieved that you've heard about. That did happen. So that whole cat and mouse game, or cowboys and Indians nonsense, began in the 40s. Now that's 70 years ago almost, 68 years ago this summer. So the technologies that allow for tracking, targeting, and hitting interstellar vehicles has gone through multiple generations of refinement. And I won't bore you. We don't have enough time to go into all the information we've collected on this. But just from an operational fund of knowledge you all need to have. A man that I know who was an electronics genius had a corporation that developed a neutrino light detector. And what that was his way of expressing when an object is not fully in the 3D, it's not fully materialized, it moves as it begins to cross from the transdimensional world, which is closely approximated to what you would call astral dream body energy. You're going to find out in a minute why they call dreamland dreamland out here at Area 51. That spacecraft, as it steps down, as it were, from the energy and resonant field that's transdimensional and non-materialized, releases a burst of this neutrino energy, or neutrino light, that this man, not for that purpose, for other research purposes, had invented a detector for. But in 1974, I believe it was, he was hit with a national security order, bless you, a national security order, NSO, so that technology was seized and put on all the NRO satellites, National Reconnaissance Office. So now we have a geosynchronous position satellite system that looks not only towards Earth but out into space with these detectors that can pick up an ET craft when it's stepping down out of transdimensional space, we'll discuss this, or hyperdimensional, into 3D, and then lock on it, and they will then attempt to hit it with one of these scalar longitudinal weapons, and sometimes with EMP, other kinds of electronic weapons. And so began the era of what Lynn Stringfield called the crash retrieval process, where over a period of time from the 40s up to, not that, well, still going on, where objects were on occasion, now the hit rate isn't that high, but where on occasion they would be able to target and hit these objects with these electromagnetic systems, and they would be damaged or destroyed or would crash. I have one man on my team who worked near Fort Huachuca, which is Army Intelligence Headquarters, and there's an underground base there. And back in the 70s, at that time, they had 9 extraterrestrial vehicles that were in storage there, and also the bodies from different species had been autopsied near Fort Huachuca, which ironically is near Tombstone, Arizona. There's some weird ironies in all of this. Now, why did I divert into all that? Because when I stepped on the stage in 1990, starting the Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative, using consciousness and remote viewing to contact ETs, we stepped into a hornet's nest that had been in the making already for 40 or 50 years. And what the result of that was, I was immediately contacted by people in the intelligence community, and the former head of Army Intelligence and some NSA people who said, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" And I said, well, I'm doing exactly what I've written I'm doing. I'm going to organize teams to be citizen diplomats to these civilizations using advanced concepts in physics and consciousness. And basically I was threatened and told I shouldn't and couldn't, and I said, watch me. This was my initiation into, so now we're 23 years into me. This was in April of 1992 when this happened to me. And I was taken to a room till 3 in the morning and given the rubber hose treatment. Basically, and I turned to this guy who was on this majority committee for intelligence, Majestic, and I said, look, I'm going to do this. I'm not rich, but I'm a doctor. I don't need your money. I died when I was 17, and I know there is no death, and death is a myth, so I'm not afraid of you. And I figured out the Rosetta Stone of contact, and there's nothing you can do about it if enough people start doing it. And he went like this and looked at me and said, well, you know exactly who this son of a bitch is? This old white-haired guy said, yeah, that's right, I am that son of a bitch. And then I said a few other choice words. Hey, I'm an emergency doctor, not, you know, a new age, whatever. So, here comes the chest tube. Nice. But, you know, and I basically said, look, I've done some research on you, and I've got some documents on you that if you get in my way, you'll be in Fort Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary for the rest of your life. So leave me alone. You know, so this is that in 92. For 23 years, I've been dealing with that level of chicanery and nonsense. But the key thing to understand is the thing that launched the Disclosure Project was this. This is what launched all of it. They knew we had figured out the Rosetta Stone where people can be, ordinary people like me and you, forget the